Hi, I'm Alex. Welcome to the channel and thanks for tuning in. So in today's video we're talking about HITID again, but specifically around the recent stock price performance, the reasons for this and what we should be thinking about as investors. If you're invested in HITID or the cannabis sector more broadly, then this is definitely one that you don't want to miss. Now we are going to be digging into some specific analysis which I have been doing on the market capitalization, and you can read this effectively as the stock price but adjusted for stock splits and other corporate actions for each of the companies within the cannabis sector. And I've not seen anyone else yet talk about this, but I do think it will provide some really interesting insight into the market and into the players in the sector. Now before we get into it, please can you smash the like button? It's massively helpful in helping the YouTube algorithm know that it doesn't only have to push the sensationalist, clickbaity content. It's also massively helpful in supporting the channel following the recent hack where since that engagement has been significantly down. It's massively appreciated, so thank you so much in advance. If you're new to the channel, then make sure you're subscribed. If you want to check out more exclusive content, be part of the private Discord and to join the video calls, then check out the Patreon. And as always, I'm not a financial advisor. This video is purely for educational and entertainment purposes only, but let's get straight into it. So looking at HITID's stock performance over various recent intervals has left a number of investors slightly underwhelmed and seemingly a growing number of investors concerned about what is going on. In this video, we will cover this in full, but to do so, we will need to dive into some more detailed and complicated parts, so bear with me because I do think that will help to set the scene somewhat. Now clearly, one can look at HITID's stock price performance on its own, but this is actually not particularly useful, and so it's best to do it versus other stocks within the sector. It's also important to do this on a number of different time intervals, as it gives a better view on the stock price performance overall. Now clearly one can look at the performance of HITID since the start of the year, and it's hard to argue about the performance there, both on a standalone basis, but also versus the broader sector index. Now before we dive into all of the charts and analysis here, I want to take a quick step back and quickly walk through the methodology of what I've done here. What I've done is I've taken all the main listed stocks in the cannabis sector and taken their daily closing market capitalization. From that, I've then created a weighted index for all of these companies, and that index is weighted by their market cap on that specific day relative to the others in the index. I should also add that HITID is excluded from these indexes just for the purposes of this analysis. From here, I've then taken the relative period of this index, which we're comparing HITID against it to, and then rebased this to HITID's market capitalization to track the relative performance of both over the same period of time. I've looked at this over various time intervals, since January, since March and since May, to give a view of how HITID is performing relative to the broader cannabis sector. Now clearly when looking at HITID versus the market since January, it's significantly outperformed the sector on that basis. There really is no grounds for discussion here. To get a better insight here, let's look at it on the basis of performance since March. That in effect is over the last 5 months. HITID is still outperforming the market index. However, it initially began that period by underperforming before recovering and generally maintaining this. Now one final chart, let's look at it over the last 2 months, which is the period of time of which there seems to be a growing frustration amongst some investors in HITID about the poor stock price performance. As you can see from this chart, it is the same story, with HITID outperforming the index. What this tells us is that while many may be disappointed by the current stock price for HITID, the stock price is performing in line with the market and is actually currently beating the broader cannabis market. What this tells us then is that this is not a stock specific issue, but rather a broader sector one. The implication from this is actually that the sector sentiment for the cannabis sector is not particularly strong, and in spite of this, HITID is still performing well. We have discussed sentiment on the channel many times before. It's always transient. Said differently, it is not permanent and it changes and evolves with time. It may be positive for a number of months or even years, and more investors will focus on the sector and invest into cannabis related companies, and the same can also be said for negative sentiment. Periods of time where there will be a loss of investor focus and a decreased level of capital invested into the sector. It's not permanent and it changes. Especially important in this regard is legalization discussions, particularly US federal legalization, but also within new regions too. Now this is a big driver of the sentiment, regardless of actually how much impact it may have on the various companies' operating models and expansion plans. Especially in the case of HITID, for it to deliver its strategy and potential, federal legalization is not actually required, but this does ultimately impact the overall market. Now eagle-eyed investors may say, hold up, you're comparing cannabis producers and retailers in this analysis. You have already discussed the important distinction at play here, so that's not fair. So to allay these concerns, this chart is showing a cannabis retail only index. It has 2 constituents, Planet 13 and Fire and Flower, and this tells the same story as with the overall index. The next important consideration is the broader market dynamics currently at play. Now, we've discussed them lots on this channel before, but primarily the concern around inflation, and as a result of this, the impact this has on interest rates and accordingly the valuation of growth stocks, but also concerns around the Delta variant and the potential impact this could have on markets more broadly. It's impossible to predict what is going to happen, but it's something which we as investors need to understand, be aware of, and to ensure that our investing timelines are aligned to these dynamics too. As I always say, be patient. Let the company deliver on its strategy and growth plan, and it will come together, but it will also take time. Now, as you can see from the analysis and charts discussed earlier, if you are bullish on an investment into the cannabis sector, and you're happy with the underlying market growth dynamics and that thesis, then whatever time frame you look at it over versus the broader market, HITID is a good investment if you're playing that trend. Now, the final thing which is really important to discuss here is the fact that there's not a direct relationship between operational performance of the company and stock price performance. What I mean by this is that just because a company is executing its strategy perfectly, that you can expect to see an immediate uptick in stock price. While this is a very good indicator that this will happen, sometimes it takes time to filter through and for the market to appreciate this. Clearly this is the case for HITID currently. They've opened more stores than their competitors, they've expanded their online capabilities more rapidly than anyone else, and they've also added over $100 million in value to the company through multiple arbitrage in its acquisition strategy. All of this implies capturing market share. However, the stock price has not yet reflected this. It will. There are very few examples in stock market history where such successful execution of a strategy does not result in stock price growth, so just be patient. It may take weeks, it may take months, it could take years. For us as investors, you are either prepared to be patient and follow the company on its journey of delivering its strategy, or you decide not to, and you feel that that's not aligned to your investing strategy and philosophy, and that's fine too. There's no right or wrong answer. It's down to you to make that decision. However, one thing I can say for sure is that no amount of whining and moaning on message boards, on Twitter, StockTwits, Reddit will do anything to help the stock price. Be patient, and remember that versus the broader cannabis market, over the various time periods which we've looked at it under this year, HITID has outperformed that, and so on that basis has performed well as cannabis sector exposure for any portfolio. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please smash the like button. If you're new to the channel, make sure you're subscribed, and check out the Patreon group if you're interested in the private Discord and the live video calls. As always, please let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. I find it so interesting to hear all the different opinions and perspectives, so please get involved. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in another video.